Hello, everyone. I am Keisha Jones, the Assistant Director of Community Engagement for the UNC Eship Center's team. I am so grateful to just welcome you all and for you all to join us. With building our community over the last few years, but definitely this past semester, these past few months, we wanted to be intentional about having authentic conversations surrounding COVID-19 and resources and best practices for you all. And we want to make sure that we extend that conversation with everything our community is facing. So with wanting to ensure that, again, not only just for this conversation, but with the work that we're doing in the Eship Center, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion is a foundation for us with all that we do throughout our community and with our students as well. So today, this conversation is all about having an authentic space for the community members, Black entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, so that they can share the successes that they had, the challenges that they may face, and just the authentic journey that they have as they continue to build their empires and their businesses along the way. So I am so excited to have this conversation today. Our moderator will be Vicki Gibbs, the Executive Director for the Eship Center team. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer it over to Vicki.
Thanks so much, Keisha. And thank you for helping to organize this and put it together. And I'm really just excited to have all of our panelists here today as well. My name is Vicki Gibbs. I am the Executive Director of the Entrepreneurship Center at Keenan Flagler Business School. And as Keisha said, one of our key goals and strategies is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's actually one of the reasons that I took this job was to help impact diversity in entrepreneurship. And with that, we are very supportive of everything that is going on with Black Lives Matter and in our community of entrepreneurs. So today, I want to welcome 4 great entrepreneurs in our network. They all participated in our Navigating the Great Pause series and have all agreed to be here to talk with you all today, share their experiences about what it's like being a Black professional, a Black entrepreneur, and successful entrepreneurs and people. So I consider all of these people friends and colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to each introduce themselves, give a little message, and then we're going to go into questions. And we will be fielding questions from the audience, so feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. And as I always do, we're going to go in alphabetical order by first name. So Amy, you're going to kick us off.
Perfect. Thank you, Vicki. Hello to everybody, and I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm the CEO of Creative Allies, and we are a marketing firm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. We focus on business marketing, sports marketing, and entertainment marketing. I've been running the company since 2018, so a couple of years. Previous to that, I made investments in companies, did things kind of side hustle-ish, but worked in corporate America. So I've just been a full-time entrepreneur for a couple of years, a Carolina graduate as well. And one thing that I wanted to just impart, we're going to cover a lot of topics today, but one thing or one message I'd like to share is to continually learn. Sessions like this are valuable, but conversations you have, no matter the level of the person, the type of job that they have, whether they're an entrepreneur or not, you can learn lessons from everywhere. And so that would be the advice I would give you as we kick this off, is to constantly be learning and growing and becoming, the best entrepreneur you can be.
Thanks, Amy. Bill, to you next.
Sure. Thanks for having us. Again, my name is Bill Spruill. I'm a local, I've been in this ecosystem for about 25, 30 years now, a local entrepreneur, currently running a company called Global Data Consortium out of downtown Raleigh. In addition to being an entrepreneur, I'm an active angel investor in the community. I just wrote my most recent check last week, and I'm also an active mentor to about 20 companies globally at this point in time. So very tied into the entrepreneurial ecosystem and glad to be here today. You want to learn more about me, go on LinkedIn, I'm there. big thing I want to hit on today is that what we deal with, what this community is dealing with right now from a bias and from a perspective, will not be solved with one simple solution. It's going to take dozens of micro solutions, dozens of micro experiments, dozens, hundreds of efforts by individuals to go out and do things in their communities, in their backyards, to try and make a change. So rather than think about the one thing that will help lift everything up, I prefer to think about what are the micro solutions that will actually move the needle bit by bit by bit until one day we've actually made a big change. So that's the thought process I'd like to get people thinking around today.
That's good, Bill. Thanks. Dana?
Good afternoon or good morning still. I think we're still in morning. My name is Dana Newell. I'm a 25-year marketing and operations professional. I am president and CEO of Newell Communication. We are a marketing and advertising full service firm. And we do everything from working with small businesses to mid-sized businesses, from website, brand development, marketing communication, marketing strategy, social media strategy as well. One of the things that I think that I would like to impart, first off, because like Amy said, we have a lot to get to, is, being African-American in any space, whether that's in a corporate America, because I have been in corporate America as well, and entrepreneurship, is that, we belong there. And anyone on this call who's a young person, please know that you belong there. Don't feel like you have to be a wallflower. Speak up. Let your presence known. Be in the room. Be present. And don't feel as though that what you say may not matter. It will. You just have to have the confidence to do and say it.
Great point, Dana. Thank you. Franklin, how about you? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, everyone. I'm Franklin Roy, and I'm the co-founder and president of Indycare. Indycare is a new retail health model, frontline healthcare, that offers really on-demand care solutions from within your local community pharmacy. And what Indycare does is it combines the capabilities of your medical providers and your pharmacists together to provide patient care solutions that really bridge the last mile of care delivery in a community. I've been doing this for about 2 years. Prior to that, I spent 17 years in the biopharmaceutical industry in various roles. That's after graduating from UNC School of Pharmacy's Doctor of Pharmacy program. So I've worked in big pharma, in the commercial sales and marketing sector. From there, I transitioned into international business development and operations, including roles for a healthcare consulting firm, and more recently in clinical drug development. So through all of that, I gained a lot, which included a decade living and working overseas, before 2 years ago taking a pretty substantial left turn and jumping into entrepreneurship and co-founding this healthcare company. So other than that, I would just say, I think the broader context of the discussion we're having today, which is a great discussion, I think, is that we all hopefully by now understand that these expressions of pain and anger and frustration that we're witnessing, really aren't about a single event or about recent events. It's really about a backdrop where Black Americans are shut out economically in a lot of ways. And that exists in all industries. But as I look into startups and entrepreneurship industry, it's not hard to observe that the situation is potentially worse, because Black entrepreneurs are even less represented in this sector than other sectors. So I think this an important thing to be aware of, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today on some of the things that we can do to be a part of the solution to make that better.
Thanks, Franklin. Okay, y'all, we're going to get started with a few questions. We already have some coming in from the audience, so I'm going to turn over to those pretty quick, but wanted to hit on a few that we talked about beforehand. Amy, I'm going to start with you. How do you address, or how can we address or overcome the often solo entrepreneur or do-it-yourself attitude in the Black entrepreneurship community?
Yeah, I think it's a good question and something that I certainly struggle with. And I think a lot of people, even if you're not a solo entrepreneur, if you have a team, delegation is a really challenging thing. And I think part of it is wanting to be really good and wanting to be great at something, at whatever you're doing, wanting to be successful, that sometimes it's difficult to ask other people to help you, frankly. I think it comes down to making sure you ask for help when you need it. And not feeling like you're less than anything because someone else is helping you. And so having that kind of team mentality, that partnering mentality, I think is important to remember. It's hard to remember, but I think it's important to remember so that you don't, because none of us are going to be successful alone. I mean, that's kind of a fact. No matter race or age or anything, everybody needs a team to be successful. So it's important to remember that. And I think just constantly reminding yourself that there are people around you, even if you don't have an internal team, but people around you, partners and people in your network that will help you grow and help you be successful, and just feel okay with asking for that help. I think that's the main thing.
That's important. And just being able to connect into a community that you know does want to help. That's probably important too, right?
I will say one of the things, like I mentioned before, I haven't been full-time entrepreneur for that long. And one of the things I've been really surprised at is how many people offer to help. It's so opposite, really, of what I was expecting, that so many people, as busy as we all are, people are willing to take the time to just have a conversation, answer a question, put you in the right direction. I found that both with female entrepreneurs, I was kind of shocked by that, and then Black entrepreneurs as well. And so just making sure I do the same thing for other people, but people have been very open and receptive to helping in any way that they can. So definitely picking your right, tribe, community, whatever you want to call it, but knowing that for the most part, I think most people are really open to help others.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Amy. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit too. So, Bill, the next question is for you. So, do you believe the Black Lives Movement's protest and recent updates being filed, do you think that can help change our country, like have lasting change?
Well, absolutely. I think anyone who thinks otherwise right now with what we've seen from a outpouring of activity perspective, not just nationwide, not just in our large cities, but in the small communities, in the small non-minority dense communities. I think if you don't see the change happening in that community, you're blind at this point. Can it help? Absolutely, because I think it's forcing all of us to have a conversation, old and young alike, around what's gone on, but what's going on in the future. People who choose to ignore this, I think, ignore it at their own peril. I had a situation earlier this week on a nonprofit board that I'm involved with, been on the board for the last 2 to 3 years. They do a lot of good work here in the Triangle, helping people out of various backgrounds, various race and ethnicities. And the current board president, when asked around whether looking at new board members, whether we should be trying to engage with people around the social justice effort, whether we should engage with the community and try to bring more people on to make the board more inclusive, the response was, I don't think we should be engaging with the radical fringe. And that just struck me as utterly tone deaf. utterly tone deaf to not just say that out loud, but to actually still be thinking that, given all of what's going on. So I took a minute, really sort of digested that, had a few conversations with friends of mine around what had occurred. And later that afternoon, I posted my resignation from that board, because despite the good work that they do, to have your leadership actually, thinking and talking in that way in today's market, when there was actually an opportunity to actually engage and look at things like the defund the police movement, which is probably not the best word choice, but it's around, do we bring in resources? Do we bring in resources that actually allow the police to do the job they're meant to do, as opposed to be doing jobs that they're having to do around mental health and other things at this point in time? So, is it something? Absolutely. And I think all of us ignore it at our own peril throughout the community.
I think you bring up a good point, is that this is the time to act and the time not to ignore, right? That is the only way that lasting change is going to happen, is by being able to recognize these things and not be complicit. So kind of on that same vein, and Dana, I'm going to direct this one to you initially, which is, have you experienced any microaggressions or discriminations from, anyone you've dealt with from a business world, like vendors, funders, and how did you handle that?
That's a very good question. And I would also say that you have to wear your emotional armor as a person of color when you're dealing with microaggressions, whether that be in the entrepreneurial space or as I have in the past working in corporate America, corporate 100 companies. Things that are said out in the open that Bill has experienced, sometimes people feel that they're not ignorant statements, but they are extremely ignorant statements. But people don't really realize that. So how I dealt with it, when someone says, "Oh, I got a tan, look, I look just like you," they put their arm up against yours and they feel like that's somehow they're aligning with me and identifying with me, but it's statements, that make you cringe. Or if you bring up something that, like Bill had experienced in this very interesting time, people don't want you to make everything race a political issue. So, when I've been confronted with that, at times I've said nothing, and then at times I've spoken up. And so you run that risk, and I'm sure Amy probably could attest to what I'm about to say, is when you do speak up, you run the risk of being the angry Black woman. And I think that is a really interesting space that you have to try to kind of, toggle between, because either you speak up, or if you don't, then you feel horrible that you didn't, say something. And so how I've dealt with it has been in various different ways, but I do have to put on my emotional, armor every day as a person of color, whether it's dealing in the entrepreneur space or dealing, with working in corporate, because it's just it just depends on the audience that you're dealing with and how you deal with it at that moment. And so I would say, be true to yourself. And if you feel like Bill did and said, this is really not cool, you have a choice to make, whether or not that's the company for you or the board that you want to be a part of, then you have to say something, but you have to be true to yourself. And at this time, say something, because in this very interesting time, it just does not make sense to be ignorant when there's so much information out there that you can either ask, or you can go out and you can do yourself a favor and find out, things that you should and should not say.
Those are great points, Dana. And I think the point that there are resources out there that help people become educated, and that's something that we need to personally do and do that work.
Yeah.
Amy, I think you had some examples about this as well, didn't you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a similar story to Bill that happened last week with a customer. And I think the points that they've both made are so important. One being, don't stay silent. I think that a lot of times we do that too much. When we hear people make comments, we don't call them out for it. I tend to be someone that tries to think the best of people. And so I usually, try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't mean it, maybe they didn't understand, whatever. But we had a situation where we had I'm working on a particular project, and there were probably six of us from our side and a couple people from the vendor side. And a comment was made specific to the Black Lives Matter movement that our group was different races, different ages, and everyone was utterly offended by it. And we didn't say anything in the moment, but we had a call right after to try to figure out how we would address it. And I honestly had never been a part of a group where the white people on the team were more upset than I was. I mean, so it was definitely offensive, if multiple people, heard the same thing and really took the same attitude towards it. So we ended up having a call with this person and their boss and their boss's boss, and basically explained what the situation was. And we had to come to an agreement that we may get fired. I mean, we may actually lose this customer. But when you're a leader and you're running a company, it's also important to make sure your team feels comfortable, that they're not put in a situation that they have to work with a client or work with a partner that makes them feel uncomfortable. And that's what I felt like we were facing at that time, is that we had a team of people who needed to do work that were really offended by it. So it was important to bring it up. Now, we had a good outcome, not from the particular person, but from the higher ups in that organization, where they were appalled. One was on the call, one was not. And we had a good, 30-minute dialogue about it. It's another point I want to bring up about not being silent, but also conversation. Not to say that that's going to change that person, but you certainly, like Dana was saying, if you hold it in, if you just are angry about it, if you have an opportunity to speak up, you should. It's tough. It was an awkward conversation. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but we had to protect our team. Certainly I had to protect myself, but the rest of the team as well that rolls up to me, and making sure that they felt like they were supported. And if they were offended by something, that their leadership, made the statement that this was not going to be tolerated. And so we had a decent outcome, like I said, from the higher ups. But it's just something that was probably the first time it had happened this year. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. But certainly in this new environment, that was the first time I experienced something just so blatant and so disrespectful and offensive. And so, yeah, I did want to share that. But I think the points are, speak up when you can, even if it's uncomfortable and awkward, and make sure to call the person out if they say something that you feel is inappropriate. You might not change that person, but I think it's important that they know and that the people around them know that what was said was not cool.
And Vicki, I just want to say one other point to what Amy says. These microaggressions that we face pretty much on an all the time basis, it chips away at your spirit. It really does do damage to us. And, and I think to Amy's point is that if you don't say something, which a lot of us probably in this panel probably haven't, said enough. But Amy was brave enough, to say something, even at the risk of losing a client, just to say, this is not okay anymore, and we're not going to go there. But it does take something away from you every time you have to have a conversation like that. And it's tiring. I mean, it really is exhausting. But, at this point, I think all of us are saying, listen to us. Understand, we go through these things all the time. It is not a one-time thing. It is constant. And so we need you to understand why this type of information, this type of conversation or statement are so offensive. And so I'm proud of Amy. Good for you, Amy. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. It was tough, but yeah.
I think it's really important too, just to think through that as like that was a great leadership thing that you did, Amy, because I think one of the things that we can do as leaders where we are is make sure that the culture that we are instilling is welcoming and everyone feels like they belong. Because if we don't do that, we fail. And I think recognizing your team knew that you had their back and they had yours and y'all were in it together. So you take a risk of losing a customer, but you'll keep those people who you value, so it's totally worth it. That's awesome. So we're talking about things that like you can actually like do to impact. Franklin, you have a lot of experience with larger organizations. What do you think they can do? And we also had a question come in from the audience. You know, how do you create welcoming environments? What things do they need to do either as new policies or procedures, or how do they approach changing things when it's so large?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. Well, I think first you have to do more than social media hashtags and donations. Right? I mean, these acts of solidarity are necessary, but it's not enough. You know, we have to do more. We have to hire Black people. We have to promote them. And in order to do that, you know, as a big corporation, you have to really aggressively scrutinize your hiring practices. And figure out how to give people a chance, even if they don't fit your ideal mold or the lineage that you're used to. And what I mean is, you know, it's normal for an investor, right, or a hiring manager to evaluate people against their own implicit assumptions of what leads to success, right? That we all have our own success formula. Did someone go to the right kind of school? Do they have experiences that are similar to my own? Are we a personality match, right? So those are the things that go into this process. And so you can see how the life experiences of these decision makers can factor heavily into what they view as their success formula. And then that formula in turn can put Black talent at a disadvantage. So to change that, you know, companies, investors, hiring managers really need to reflect on, in a meaningful way, on what practices they use to evaluate candidates and whether those practices truly identify different types of talent, or do they just maintain your status quo as an organization. So those are, you know, and in order to do that, I think you have to really, it's not easy, but you have to demand from your hiring team that they discover this talent and that they look to hire for trajectory. And so that can be a, you know, process that requires as a company some devoted purpose, you know, that's put towards that, and starting to think different. How you look at these resumes, how you look at people, and how you find the talent that's out there. So I think those are the things that from big companies that are going to make a big difference, is really taking a look at those practices and how they can change them with purpose to diversify their talent.
Great points, Franklin. And I think the big piece that you hit on is intentionality and looking at things objective, because I think we all sort of carry the lens that we've always had into something. And sometimes it can be hard to be objective. So you may even have to bring someone in from the outside to help you do those evaluations to make sure that you're approaching it in the right way. Those are great points. So we're going to rotate it a little bit back and talking about entrepreneurship. So let's talk a little bit about, and this is combining some questions from the audience as well as some of the things that we had talked about beforehand. But let's talk about access to resources. You know, that can be talent, it can be capital for entrepreneurs. What do you think a Black entrepreneur needs to think through? What sort of challenges do they have in these areas? And are there any barriers that they can face? Any advice that you could give? Bill, I'm going to start with you with that question.
Well, barriers are legion. There are so many barriers to being successful. I think as a Black entrepreneur that I've encountered, and I'm certain that others have also encountered. We can run down the list. You know, access to capital absolutely tends to be number one. But it's not just money, it's actually access to, I've been using the term legacy, is access to knowledge and people who are willing to help move you forward on that entrepreneurial journey. And I think it's a double-sided problem. I think it tends to be hard for us to basically be willing to reach out to others because we have a lot of internal biases ourselves around asking others for help on the journey, asking others proactively to be able to engage in their conversations, in other conversations. And I think there tends to be too much of a slant towards being a Black entrepreneur as opposed to a entrepreneur. And many times when people talk about me or want to have me involved in something, it's, you're a successful Black entrepreneur. And I'm like, no, hold on. Actually, I'm a successful entrepreneur. I'm actually one of the top in my community, in my space. Our company was one of the few companies during the midst of COVID, we were able to actually go out and raise significant money at great valuations. And that's because, I've been a successful entrepreneur and I've put together a successful team. So, the Black part is an additive, but it doesn't need to be there as far as I'm concerned. That's an attitude that I think we all need to make sure we embrace on one side of the equation. And then on the other side of the equation, I think it's important for non-minorities to be willing to provide their legacy, their access to resources proactively to other entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs of color. And what I mean by that is it's not always about money. It's about connections to customers. It's about connections to talent. It's about connections to a lot of things. And I know I've seen a couple questions around how we built our team and how we've been able to sort of bring diversity in. And that's because I've spent years cultivating a network in this community and globally of people who respect me for me, I think. And as a result of that, they tend to refer their friends, family members, and others to me for opportunities. So our talent pipeline, up until very recently has been great. We've actually grown to a point where it's harder and harder for me to use the homegrown network, which is a good point of success to be at. But I think extension of legacy, extension of resources that goes beyond just sort of capital access is important to embrace here. Capital access is absolutely a problem because of wealth. There's a whole lot of issues behind that. But I think if, I come from a middle class background. We didn't raise money. We've got some friends and family involved in our business, but we didn't raise capital. And I built a company until very recently, and I built a company that's, north of $10 million profitable. And we've got 25 people on board our team. We keep adding people that I've not met yet now. It's kind of bizarre. That comes from really having built a very proactive network in my community over years and years and years, and being willing to put myself out there to do that. And I think anyone who knows me and knows my background, and that's the one thing I do a lot of, much to the chagrin of probably my co-founder and other team members, is put myself out there and pay it forward and then cash it back in along the way. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, great point. Amy, I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts around growing a diverse team and, kind of building on some of the things Franklin and Bill were talking about.
Yeah, just what Bill was just talking about. I think the networking piece is what I wanted to touch on. I think a lot of times, certainly as Black entrepreneurs or employees, we think about, the larger corporations and the white companies need to be more diverse. But we also have to be diverse with our network and with our partnerships as well. Back to what I was saying about with learning and partnering and all of those things, making sure that your network has people from different backgrounds, different ages, different races, so that you know, essentially when you become a part of someone's network, you become a part of their network. And so if you have a connection with someone where you can provide them support or help and they can provide that to you, that means everybody that they know, everybody that they work with, you really have access to that. So just don't limit yourself to only people who look like you, whether it's women, whether it's Black people, whatever. Make sure you're broadening your own network so that you can tap into these other areas and other resources like Bill was talking about. I think that's hugely important.
That's
And
great.
Vicki, I would say that that's a hard thing to do. Like Bill was saying, you know, you have to put yourself out there, because it's very difficult to do. And, you know, I think when I meet people having a one-on-one like you and I had done many months ago, is probably my most comfortable, you know, space for me. But, you know, I've had to go to networking events where I am the only person of color in there. But I did it, you know, because I'm getting my name out there and getting my company out there. But it's difficult because people tend to cluster and be around people that look like them, you know, think like them. And sometimes it's hard to just kind of break in, but I will go and, you know, insert myself in a conversation just so that they know that, you know, I have something of worth. You know, I should be here. I belong in this space too. And, you know, when we start talking, it becomes evident that I'm an expert in this particular thing. And, you know, and like Bill said, and Amy said, you have to just put yourself out there, network, even if you are the only person of color in the room, because you need everyone, not just ourselves, but you need others as well, to build, as Bill was saying, to build your larger network.
Yeah, great point.
But it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
And Vicki, well, touch on one other thing that Franklin was saying. I know we're talking about you know, entrepreneurs, but he was talking about corporate America. One thing that I thought of is back when I did work in corporate America, if I were looking for a job and I went to somebody's website, I look at the leadership team, I look at the board of directors. That's the first thing I do. If I don't see a female, if I don't see a person of color, I'm just moving on. And so when you're thinking about talent, you can actually lose a lot of good people just because you're not focused on representation of your own brand. And so that can be applied to small businesses and entrepreneurs too. As you think about building out your team, think about what it looks like to somebody that you want to hire, you know, whether they're younger and maybe you have older employees, or whether they're older and you have younger employees, but just thinking about how you want to be presented or how you will be presented, because a lot of times you won't get that feedback. It's not like someone's going to write you a note and tell you, hey, I don't want to apply, you know, so you've got to look at that yourself, whether you're a small company or a big company, and think about, how do I look to the world? What does my website look like? What does my LinkedIn look like as far as who I'm connected with? Because people will look at those things digitally to basically make an assumption about your brand. And so I think that part is important too, to keep in mind.
That's really good. And I think it's, again, there's that intentionality behind it, but there's also, when you think about hiring and you think about hiring from the outside, but also from within, and you think about developing the people within your organization and practices around that. Franklin, we had a follow-up question for you around, are there any best practices around how to look at talent differently when it comes to hiring underrepresented groups? And you had mentioned about looking at trajectory instead of some other things. Do you have any other sort of elements there that you could offer as advice?
Yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, there's, I guess when you talk about looking at trajectory, there's a little bit more, you start to shift towards maybe more the art of this as opposed to the science of it, you know. But I think that's really, it's easy. And I can go back to, you know, my own experience in hiring people and companies. It's easy to kind of get stuck in, okay, check mark credentials, check mark school that they went to, check mark, you know, previous job is, you know, aligned with what I know to be leading to be successful. It's a little bit harder to kind of step outside that mindset and really look at the individual, you know, and look at their life experiences and look at how that might lead to a certain trajectory of success with the right coaching and coachability and other personality traits. So it's I don't know that there's a strict formula to that, and there probably is that I'm not aware of. But I think of it more in terms of just recognizing those implicit, thoughts that go into how you think about what defines someone who's likely to be successful, stepping outside of that a little bit and thinking more about them as an individual, and what they've been through, what they've seen, and how that may project for them in the role or within your organization.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, because I think a lot of the things that have come to light here recently is talking about the systemic racism, and that's those systems where it's like, what are these check marks that are allowing people in or not? And it's those pieces that we have to sort of deconstruct and then rebuild in a more equitable way, so that we're getting a better look at the person and the individual who would be contributing, right? And I think it's by understanding that we can start to break some of those things down and change.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to look at the formula and the check boxes as the right thing to do, right? As an organization, you may think, oh, look, we have a process and it's standard, and therefore it's equal for everyone. But I think that mindset doesn't take into account the things that I'm talking about, which is how you've defined that formula to begin with.
Yeah. No, great point. So there have been a lot of questions about access to capital. And so I think there's two different, audiences that are asking the questions. There are Black entrepreneurs in the audience who are wondering, are there resources for them that y'all could recommend? But then there are also investors in the audience who are saying they are interested in investing in minority entrepreneurs. And how do we get these two groups connected? So I don't know if I put in the answer I put, there's a couple of Resilient Ventures is a new angel network that is targeted to minority entrepreneurs. Tom Droge and Keith Daniel are the organizers of that. Dr. Shante Williams, she leads Black Pearl Investments, that is a firm out of Charlotte that is investing in healthcare related startups funded by minority founders. So I don't know, audience or panel, do y'all have any other recommendations on either side of those? Bill, you look like you had an answer. I'm trying to read your eyes.
The answer, unfortunately, is it is definitely a hard road to hoe. I spent some time looking, over the past years as we were growing our business, and there were not a lot of resources, not just here, but nationally. Frankly, this is not a thing. I think the one bit of advice I would, and I offer this to most any entrepreneur I talk to about fundraising. If you go after any of the newly minted, for instance, venture funds that are really focused on minority entrepreneurship and minority investing, do yourself a favor, do the homework on the people running that fund and, the corporate investors. And look and see what they've done in the past, because their history the history doesn't lie. And that's one of the things I discovered along the way, where I thought minority venture funds were actually really being, I was like, oh, that's great. There's a great pool of money for me to actually access out here. And it turned out, whoops, they're actually not actually investing. It's more PR related. It goes back to maybe something that was said at the very beginning. I think Franklin mentioned it. But this whole idea, a lot of things out here that get put out here, especially during these times, tend to be PR related and not truly impactful. So be careful about putting your time into people who are talking about it, but not actually doing something about it. And you can really figure that out quickly by just doing your background homework. Check the people out, see what they've been doing, and that's going to inform you a lot. Doesn't mean absolutely that they've not turned a corner and actually want to do something, but you can get a pretty good idea there. So not maybe the answer you were thinking I was going to give, but it's a helpful answer nonetheless.
It's an honest answer, which is what I was looking for. So, I mean, I think part of the things that we're talking about is that there are gaps that exist, and sometimes there's not a solution that's readily available. And so just being honest about that, and then being able to work together as a community to help fill those is where we got to get to, right? One of the audience members, Elaine Bull, had mentioned that RTP Capital is actively looking for diverse entrepreneurs now as a part of their fund, as is Portfolio Raising America. So those are a couple to maybe check out as well. There's also a co-working space in Durham called Provident 1898 that's relatively new. And so they're a great space in downtown Durham. So one of the questions that had come in from the audience is, who have been influential role models or mentors? And so I'd like to put this out there to all of y'all. So if y'all have any particular role models or mentors that have been really influential in your path. Who wants to start? Franklin, you want to start?
Sure. I'll kind of answer that in two ways. I think one of the things that we talked about, I think has been reiterated from the panelists, is that breaking into the network is usually the hardest thing to do. So when a Black entrepreneur breaks into that network, I think it's important they find ways to get other Black entrepreneurs through those guarded gates. And then to relate that to your question, because I didn't start my career as an entrepreneur, but I was very, very lucky in that, the first job I had in my career in big pharma, I had a Black manager. It was a very rare thing in big pharmaceutical companies back then. And after my second job, I had a Black manager as well. And in both those cases, both of them, Ian Daly is the first one and William Holmes is the second one. They were able to take me aside and say, look, Franklin, you're a talented young man. You're hungry. You're doing a lot of great things. But, I've been in this company for 10 years, for 15 years. Let me help you understand how to navigate these halls, right, as a minority, right, in this company. There's things that you have to kind of be aware of and you have to think about to make sure you don't stop your own pathway to success and trajectory. So having, people like that is invaluable to me. It has been invaluable to me. And what I'd like to see is, a situation where you don't have to get so lucky, to get that sort of support and that sort of counseling, that sort of advice, where it's more readily available for the average Black professional, either going into entrepreneurship or going into, their professional career, because it makes all the difference in the world.
Great. Dana, how about you?
Well, I'm going to go a little different route. My biggest inspiration was my grandmother. This was a person who I think great-grandparent were slaves, and so I'm not far off the generation, and who had a 6th grade education, but never let any of her grandchildren believe that they were anything less than fantastic and wonderful. Out of that person, my grandmother, who had a 6th grade education, doing sharecropping in a domestic, born out of her were doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs like me, teachers, and so on. And so she made us feel that we can do and be anything. And so that is where I get my gumption from, is that I come from some pretty hardy stock of a grandmother who just said, don't ever quit, and taught that to my dad, and who taught it to me. And like I said, in our family, on my father's side, at least, I'm just focusing on her, were some pretty, cool folks doing some great things. In fact, my cousin Tammy was the first African-American judge in Savannah, Georgia. And she's still doing it. And so I credit my go-get-itness, and my spirit, and just wanting to just be everything that I can be for myself, for my husband, my kids, because of Maddie Mae Benton, who had a 6th grade education.
That's awesome, Dana. How about you, Amy?
I would say combination of the two previous. I think my parents were a pretty big inspiration, both from a tiny town in Louisiana, and certainly made it their focus to get out of there and give their kids opportunity. And so we certainly were raised, myself and my brother, to never believe there wasn't anything we could achieve, to not be concerned with what other people might have thought of us or limitations that other people put on us. So we are both extraordinarily confident, go to bed in what we can do and what we're capable of doing. And I think that makes a pretty big difference. In the corporate world, I never was thinking when Franklin was talking, I didn't have a Black manager probably until a few years ago before I left corporate America. So I didn't have that luxury, but I think it's still important, again, take lessons where you can get them from. So I do have a few people that I'm still in touch with, people that I may have worked for who are not Black, but who are very helpful and insightful in some of the things that I want to do. What I haven't found is probably a really great female mentor, but I do have folks that are, African-American mentors that I can rely on to help grow myself professionally, but also help me grow the business. And so I think for me, it's a mix of family, kind of a mix of the environment I was raised in and what I was taught mentally. I think that is so important, being confident and feeling like you can accomplish really anything versus always relying on having to see somebody do it in front of you to know that you can do it. Sometimes it really does have to come from within, because unfortunately we might not see it. We might not have the opportunity to see someone that looks like us being the success that we want to be. So sometimes it has to come from within. So a mix of, the corporate world and family for me.
A great one, Amy. Bill, how about you?
So I've taken from so many different people over the course of my journey, but there's probably 2 people I point to very specifically. A guy named Charles Phillips, who most recently retired as CEO of a company called M4 in the enterprise software space. Prior to M4, he was actually co-president and worked his way up at Oracle. And he, the reason why he is so unique is that in enterprise software, enterprise technology in the Valley, he was the unicorn when it comes to, African American who was able to rise to the top at an organization like Oracle, who was in charge of that organization alongside Safra Katz prior to some changes that Larry Ellison made. And the interesting thing about him was that he was resilient when that happened. The changes were made. It was clear he was not going to be ever put in charge of the organization. So he moved on and became, CEO of M4 and grew that business phenomenally before he recently retired. And he's someone who I'm not directly connected with. I've made efforts to actually get directly connected. I've actually just totally, I've done a lot of crazy things trying to connect with that guy. I never quite had the success there, but I've been tracking his career all the way through. So that's one on the professional side. And then much like everyone else my mom, throughout my life has definitely been an influence, but actually in the last, say, 15, 20 years, she's been more of an influence around her resiliency. And what I mean by that is I published a blog post not too long ago about, how am I feeling, and around just kind of this, constant blanket of, I won't say oppression, but just, the constant grind we have as Black people trying to be successful and trying to carve our own worlds out in this world. And my mom, last 15 years, she's been bedridden. She's got, advanced dementia, sharing that information on a personal level. The thing she doesn't do is complain. She doesn't say, I never see her when I go to visit every few weeks. And anybody who knows me well knows I'm there about every 2 weeks if I can be there. and she does not ever complain. When her hips were hurting before she became bedridden, she didn't complain. When she had mini strokes, we literally had to drag her to the hospital. She didn't complain. And so that attitude I learned. And rather than complain, I put my head down and just do my work. And I've done that sort of repeatedly as I've built my career up. And just put my head down, don't complain about it, just do my thing and keep showing people up along the way. And that's just something that, has definitely impacted me amongst many other things that she taught me, that even most recently when she's not able to communicate, she's still teaching me lessons. So another great mentor there.
Those are great. I loved hearing about all of y'all's. And I think that's important for everyone in the audience to think through. We all need mentors to help us get through those next challenges. I'm going to ask one more investment question, then we're going to go towards wrapping it up. So I put some things that I've mentioned and put some things in the chat about, investment portfolios that are looking for minority investments. So Tim McLaughlin from Co-Founders Capital also put in a question because they are also basically that he said that they've been looking at this challenge. They would like to have more minority entrepreneurs that they're investing in, but the percentage that they're investing in compared to their deal flow is proportionate, which is part of the problem. And so they're wondering, how can they source more deals for minority entrepreneurs? They're trying to be more proactive. And is that the right strategy? Do y'all have any suggestions for where they can find more deal flow or how to address those things?
I'll offer a couple of thoughts. I'm not, just nowhere near an expert on capital, but I have had people come to me in similar situations with those questions of not having a network of Black entrepreneurs to invest in. And two things that we actually suggested to those individuals, this was before COVID, but one is we were going to help them put together a mixer where we would have a couple of investors and then just invite people that we knew that were entrepreneurs, because a lot of times, I think maybe Dana said this before, a lot of times you interact with people who look like you and that's it. And so even for someone who maybe has money and they have a desire, they don't know where to go or where to start. And while there might be some groups and things like that, they don't know where to start. So one of the things we were going to do for this particular group was just put this mixer together. And maybe that's something that can be done virtually, but that was one idea. And then the second idea we had for somebody, it wasn't around investing, but it was about financial, and it was someone who wanted to give back. And it's like, well, what about teaching sessions or educational sessions? Because a lot of us, entrepreneurs, we don't know enough about what do we need to do to be ready for somebody to invest in us. So what are the questions that we have? And maybe these investors could host sessions or something like that to educate people. And in that process, you'll meet companies or you'll learn about companies that maybe you want to invest in. Maybe you don't, and maybe you just educate people. But a way to just kind of make those connections where they may not currently exist. And those were just a couple of the ideas we've had in the past few months that could work for some people.
Those are great ideas, Amy. So we've got,
go ahead,
yep,
Vicki.
go ahead, Dana.
No, I was going to say not just also angel investors, but also maybe look at entrepreneurs that you may want to bring onto your team for other services. It may not necessarily mean that we may need money, but maybe bring us on so that you have a diverse team of people and thoughts and exchange of ideas. So if there are companies out there, all of us are available. Amy, Bill, Franklin, call us, because if we have a certain expertise that you're lacking, that's also another way to invest in Black-owned businesses. Give us a call. We're good at what we do. Call us.
Yeah, nope, that's a great one.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about out of time. We're going to do a final lightning thing, and I just want to ask y'all, if you had a piece of advice to give your younger self, what would that be? Y'all, 15 seconds each. So, Bill, why don't you start?
Double down on excellence and perseverance. Be more of who you are and be absolutely resilient in pursuit. If I had known more of that at age 20 than, say, age 30, who knows where I would be now.
Thanks, Bill. Franklin, how about you?
Yeah, similar. I would say it's more of a doubling down on something I've probably done, which is really to understand that every relationship counts. Not all are created equally, but you're going to learn how to filter the meaningful ones and build strong relationships and gradually work your way closer to being in the network that you want to be in, right? So I think I knew early that relationships mattered, and I've learned over the years it mattered exponentially more than I ever imagined. So it's really important to focus on.
Thanks, Franklin. Amy, how about you? One
Yeah,
piece of advice to your younger self.
My younger self, I would say back to networking a little bit. Don't rely solely on your work or your office to make sure that you're branching out outside of that. I think many young people on the phone, you might be the only Black person, the only female, the youngest person. Some of us have been through all three of those, and don't rely on the people you work with to provide that motivation. Make sure you're looking outside of that and make sure you build that network very early on, and not wait until your later years to do that.
Thanks, Amy. And Dana, since it's your birthday and you came to us with this idea for this panel too, want you to give the last piece of advice.
My last piece of advice is don't make everything a battle. You don't have to fight every battle. Pick your battles. And just know when to speak up when you have to. If it's something that really is concerning to you and you really feel like someone needs to know about it, do that, but just pick your battles. And as I said earlier, be present in the room, speak up. Don't be afraid to let everyone know that you're there to contribute, and that your life and your thoughts and what you bring to the table, it definitely matters.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you to all of you, Amy, Bill, Dana, Franklin. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Thank you, audience, for being here. And thank y'all for letting me moderate. This was just so wonderful for me. And I just feel blessed to know all of you and to have you as a part of my life personally, but also our network here at the UNC Eship Center. I do want to remind everyone that we do have a DEI panel with Dr. Bates coming up on July 28th. If you go to our events page, you can sign up then. And we do have a Slack community now. A lot of the people in the audience on the chat have been asking about how to continue this conversation. If you join that Slack channel, there will be information that comes in the follow-up email. We can create some channels and we can carry on the conversation there. We will be doing some more panels, resources, and things like that around Black entrepreneurship, Black entrepreneurs. So if you have ideas about ways we can help, please let us know. We are here as an ally. We are here to help promote, help support, and to create change so that we can have a better future and not repeat the past. So we are committed to helping everybody be successful. So thank y'all very much for your time. We look forward to seeing you. Keisha, thank you so much for organizing this and providing questions and stuff like that too. Thank you very much. So anything else to say, Keisha, or you want us to sign off?
This was an amazing experience. Thank you, attendees, for your feedback, comments, questions, and we'll continue the conversation. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.